Why? What's so important?
Well, this is a crucial election for Greece. If it doesn't go right, then Greece could be kicked out of the European Union, could be kicked out of the euro, it could go to the drachma, and it could be really catastrophic. There could be really catastrophic consequences for Greece.
Okay, so why would that be so catastrophic? Many of your fellow Greeks think that that is a preferred outcome. We've seen a lot of scenarios where countries that are in a weak economic position, as Greece is, actually find that devaluing their currency is a solution, and even defaulting, right? I mean, remember the great Russian default and devaluation of 1998? People thought it was a disaster. I remember a banker told me then, we would rather eat nuclear waste than buy more Russian debt. Those same guys went back in there pretty quickly, and they're buying it again.
Yes.
Why is that such a disaster?
Well, remember, this is a kind of a strange transition, because here you are going to go from a very strong currency to a very weak currency, and the Greek drachma is going to be devalued heavily when it comes into existence. So it might come originally in an exchange rate of 1-to-1, but within a few weeks it will go to 2-to-1, 3-to-1. What does this mean? Practically speaking, all the imported goods are going to double and triple in price. So the average person on the street is going to see his purchasing power dwindle. He will have very little, he will get very little for his money. That's problem number one. Problem number two is that, expecting this to happen, the banks are going to fall apart. How? People are going to take out the money from the banks. They're going to keep them at home, put them abroad, put them anywhere, instead of getting them converted to 1-to-1 when they know later on it's going to be 2-to-1 or 3-to-1. So the banks are going to collapse even before the drachma gets introduced. Then further on, once the drachma is introduced, the government has a deficit between expenses and tax revenue. So it will print more and more drachmas to finance that deficit, and there would be inflation. People expect 40-50% inflation. These are really large numbers. More unemployment, less production, lower asset prices. This is a really catastrophic scenario, which could lead to social unrest, could even lead to humanitarian problems.
Jim, am I going to hear a contrarian voice?
No, I would agree with them, but I'll give you a little different, maybe financial market perspective, in that things I think are moving along much faster than everybody thinks. And what I mean by much faster is that there's only days or maybe a couple of weeks for Greece right now. The big story that's forcing the hand of everybody in Greece is there's a gigantic deposit run going on right now. Money is leaving the country. There was a story today that 0.5 or 0.5% of the assets a day are leaving the banking system, and have been since May, that by the time we get to June 18th, which is only this weekend, there might not be a banking system left in Greece, because everybody's in a wholesale flight to get out of the country ahead of the elections right now. And it's going to be very difficult for them to even survive days past the election if there's any uncertainty as far as putting together a coalition government or anything else along those lines. So things are moving along quite fast. The other thing you have to keep in mind about what's been happening in Greece is what we refer to as the contagion effect. You're already seeing it in Spain with the bailout of the banking system in Spain. If Greece leaves for whatever reason, no one is viewing that as an isolated occurrence. It is the beginning of eventual breakup of the entire Eurozone and maybe even the EU together. That you can then start the game of, when does Spain leave? When does Portugal leave? Would Ireland survive? Does France need a bailout? And then pretty soon the euro doesn't exist. Pretty soon then you have to start calling into question the whole EU. So it is the beginning of a process, not the end of the process. And I think that a lot of people make that mistake about about Greece, that somehow it's the end of a process. What happens on the 18th? What happens with Greece? It only starts something there. It doesn't end it there.
These people are upset. They have lost 25% of their income. So now they say, well, it couldn't be worse. They don't quite understand what we are saying here, that it could be worse. They don't quite grasp it.
Well, are Greek people just dumb?
I don't think they're dumb. They haven't been well informed. I mean, it's one thing to be smart, but if you hear crazy stories all the time, and you don't have a degree in economics or in macroeconomics, and you don't analyze this stuff, you want to rely on people who would tell you the truth about these things and have reliably tell you this. And I think only very recently, that is in the last couple of weeks after the last elections, I have seen these analysis about what's going to happen with the drachma come through to the general public and people getting better informed. Also, a lot of people say in Greece, it's not really about euro, not euro. It's really about austerity, no austerity. They have this fiction in their minds, a fictitious idea really, that you can be in Europe, you can have all the benefits of the European Union without having to follow specific rules, economic rules. And I don't say
let me just question how fictional that is, because that has been the Greek experience to date. And isn't there, to a certain extent, a game of chicken going on between the Greek voters and Berlin?
Well,
how much will Germany pay to avoid the sort of domino effect that we've all just been talking about?
I have the feeling that if it gets down to that game of chicken, Greece is going to lose. Because the stakes within Greece are so high, Greece would commit suicide going to the drachma. So no matter how bad it's going to be for the European Union, it's a non-credible threat to say, oh, I'm going to jump out of the window if you don't do this. And you know that you're going to die, that I would die if you jump out of the window. It doesn't make that much sense. It's not credible.
Jim, you're nodding your head. I want to ask you a more markets version of this scenario. We have started to hear for some time now, coming from Europe, coming particularly from the Germans, this idea of a firewall and this notion that the European banking system could survive if Greece chooses another path. Do you buy that?
You have to really separate that question into two groups, right? If Greece were to leave and it ended there, could the European banking system survive? The answer is yes. But if Greece were to leave and it was a domino that was going to lead to other issues with Spain or Portugal or Ireland, the answer is no. Then the banking system would be a giant mess. And there's also all under.
But let me just stop you there. So is it possible for Greece to leave and for it not to be a domino? That's my question.
I don't see a scenario how that works, that we could say Greece is unique, it's something special, it can leave for various reasons unique to them, but what's happening in Italy, what's happening in Spain, what's happening in Portugal, what's happening in Ireland, and what may be happening in France from a market perspective, those are unrelated? No, they're all related. And that's why the contagion effect is so high right now. That's why the Spanish banking system got a bailout 2 days ago, because of the contagion effect and the fear that this is going to lead to a larger problem. But let me step back real quick and say, what is the problem that we're talking about here? The problem is the euro. The euro is a flawed structure. They being Europe, put together a currency first without the institutions around that currency. They went backwards. They put the instrument first, and now we're finding 17 countries using the same currency simply does not work. And until they want to get serious about talking about some kind of fiscal union or some kind of United States of Europe, do away with France, do away with Spain, do away with Germany, and call your capital Brussels. If you're not ready to do that, then this euro experiment ultimately is not going to work, and you better talk about maybe going back to legacy currencies. Because putting together the currency first and then saying we'll work out the institutions later has put us in this exact problem that we've had, highlighted by Greece, but it's not going to stop with Greece. If Greece leaves for whatever reason, no one is viewing that as an isolated occurrence. It is the beginning of eventual breakup of the entire Eurozone and maybe even the EU together.